March 29, 33 AD. Jesus is leading his disciples from their home base in Galilee south to Jerusalem, the center of Jewish culture. He's been to Jerusalem before, but this time, word of Jesus' impending arrival is sparking grave concern among the Jewish leaders, even panic. The reason? They fear any messianic figure who might lead the people into revolt. And this week, Passover week, is shaping up to be a perfect storm for revolution.
So they get together at the high and holy festivals. Passover certainly was one of the main ones. They're all together in Jerusalem. Jerusalem now is no longer a sleepy little village of 50,000 or so. It's about 250,000. And so with these mobs together, the messianic leaven can grow into outright revolution.
The revolution the Jewish leaders fear is an uprising against Rome. For nearly 100 years, Israel has been under the vast Roman Empire. For the most part, Rome has let the Jews keep their culture and practice their religion. But talk of insurrection against Rome never really goes away. Jewish leaders know full well that if their people try to make war against Rome, they'll be crushed. So an alliance is in place between Rome, which wants to pacify the people they've conquered, and Jewish leaders who want to keep their way of life intact. Jesus now threatens that delicate balance. For years, the people of Jerusalem had heard stories about a miracle worker. But because the reports came from the rural north in Galilee, Jewish leaders in Jerusalem didn't see much threat to their power structure.
But you have to remember that the Jews in Jerusalem looked down their noses at their counterparts in Galilee. They would criticize the way they spoke the language. They criticized their synagogue-going habits, and most Judean jokes began, you hear what one Galilean said of the other.
But then, a Galilean named Jesus did a miracle that couldn't be ignored. On the outskirts of Jerusalem, he brought a dead man back to life. A man who'd been dead for days. A man named Lazarus.
The raising of Lazarus took place in the southeastern corner of Jerusalem, at the little village of Bethany. And this was witnessed not just by Jesus' friends, but by his opponents as well.
It wasn't long before news of Lazarus reaches the door of the top Jewish official, Caiaphas.
And they, of course, then pushed the panic button. They went to Caiaphas saying, what are we going to do? If this man continues doing these wonders, the nation will follow him in revolution against Rome. The Romans will come and destroy our city, burn our temple. And Caiaphas at that point says, you don't know what you're talking about. It's expedient that one man should die and the nation not perish. And from that day forward, they sought to arrest Jesus.
The move to arrest Jesus is verified even outside the biblical accounts. The Jewish Talmud, written by sources hostile to Jesus, includes the details of his arrest notice, saying Jesus was wanted because he practiced sorcery.
Very often, I'm asked, is there any outside evidence to prove these miracles happened? This one comes very, very close. Because what's the difference between a miracle and sorcery? Sorcery is accomplished, something extraordinary or supernatural, accomplished with help from below. What's a miracle? Same thing accomplished with help from above. And so what is the common observed phenomenon, regardless of its cause? Something extraordinary or supernatural is conceded in hostile sources.
The Lazarus resurrection and other miracles have by now so catapulted Jesus' notoriety that when he enters Jerusalem for the Passover, crowds line the streets.
And everybody's cheering him on except the priests. And they're not too happy about this demonstration, and they criticize Jesus.
The overt criticism of Jesus is part of a new tack by the Jewish leaders. Their goal, to discredit him, a plan they will bring to bear even more forcefully later in the week. But not before Jesus eviscerates them for profiteering and corruption. At the Passover celebration, 250,000 Jews descend on the temple in Jerusalem, all intent on giving a sacrifice to God. But Jewish leader Caiaphas and his father-in-law Annas control the process, ensuring they got their cut.
And all of the concessions in the temple area were controlled by Annas, Caiaphas, and company. The Sadducean aristocracy, not the Pharisees, but the Sadducees controlled all the concessions in the temple. They got a kickback from all the concessions there.
On Monday, Jesus encounters this corruption firsthand. Enraged, he drives the profiteers out of the temple.
And so now Jesus is attacking the money-making heart of the Sadducean aristocracy that control the temple. So now they want to get him. How can they get him with a man being so very popular? The best way to do that would be to drive a wedge between Jesus and his followers.
There would be no need to kill Jesus if the Jewish leaders could simply make him look foolish to his followers. So they devise a barrage of seemingly impossible to answer questions,
which they do in what I like to call the famous press conferences of Jesus on Tuesday and Wednesday. Because if you can show he can't answer a question correctly or give the wrong answer, then you have suddenly disgraced him before his adoring followers. So it's a technique used to the present day yet, especially during presidential primaries.
So in front of crowds, Jesus fields the questions, the impossible questions.
Impossible to answer, except each time Jesus maneuvered a beautiful answer around those questions. So as of Wednesday night, he's more popular than ever.
By Thursday, Jewish leaders realize their attempts to discredit Jesus have failed, and they move to Plan B. Meanwhile, that evening, Jesus assembles his followers. At some point in the meal, Judas slips away to meet with Jewish leaders, finalizing his role in a plan to capture Jesus. For a small payment, Judas agrees to lead them to Jesus' location. But why would they even need an informant? Why not just arrest Jesus when he visits the temple?
Why do we need a Judas Iscariot to tip off the authorities where Jesus is? When he's daily in the temple, why didn't they arrest him there? Clearly, they dared not arrest him in the temple because of his growing popularity. And they're going to need an insider to clue them because it's nighttime.
Arresting Jesus when he's away from the crowds at night is more difficult than it might seem. Jerusalem is now a massive tent city of more than 250,000 people, and it's not clear where Jesus is staying. Plus, it's pitch black outside, save the flickering of a fire or torch. Most men have beards, making a positive ID tricky. And there's one more factor to consider.
In the ancient world, they didn't have glasses. You realize that most of our ancients kind of squinted through life. So you're at night, you're not exactly sure what Jesus looks like because you can't see a picture of him in the newspaper or see him on TV. And then you also have his image somewhat changing depending on the condition of the flaring fire. And then you can't see clearly in the first place because your eyesight isn't good. Yeah, you will need an insider.
By now, Jesus has ended his meal and is walking to the Garden of Gethsemane with disciples Peter, James, and John. Jesus then goes off to pray. His disciples fall asleep. Judas leads the authorities directly to Jesus, who does not resist arrest. The disciples run away scared. Jesus is then taken from Gethsemane across the Kidron Valley into Jerusalem to appear before the former high priest named Annas.
He was in many ways what you might call the godfather of Jerusalem. He's the gray eminence behind the scenes. He's pulling all the strings.
Keeping a low profile, Peter approaches the courtyard of the palace where Jesus is being held, perhaps hoping to help his friend in some way. But instead, Peter pretends he doesn't know Jesus.
He was one of those with this Jesus.
What? I don't know what you're talking about.
Jesus had earlier predicted this moment, and when Peter realizes his failure, he's overwhelmed with feelings of regret. After a short time with Annas, Jesus is led to an assembly of Jewish leaders, led by the current high priest Caiaphas, and hastily prepared legal proceedings get underway.
First of all, you couldn't have a capital trial after the sun goes down. So we know it was a hearing. And there we have a stacked court. The case is falling apart because it was hastily put together.
As the trial degenerates, Caiaphas pauses to formulate one final question of Jesus. Does he claim to be the Messiah? Because Jewish law would dictate that a false Messiah be put to death.
When he asked if he is the Messianic Christ, and Jesus said yes, he should have investigated that claim. What if he were? And of course, Christians believe that's exactly what he was. He didn't do that.
Caiaphas stands among the most documented people of the biblical era. In addition to the gospel accounts, he's detailed in several non-Christian writings from the period. And in 1990, construction workers accidentally unearthed his actual bones, preserved in this burial chest called an ossuary.
Magnificently carved. 2 giant rosettes cut into the side. On the other side, his name is mentioned in Aramaic, Yosef bar Caiaphas. We are talking about the bones of Joseph Caiaphas. A thrilling discovery, one of the most unheard of bits of solid research and archaeology that has ever hit New Testament scholarship. The very bones of the first biblical personality ever discovered in 2,000 years.
As Thursday night blends into Friday morning, Jesus remains in Caiaphas' custody, beaten repeatedly as Caiaphas calculates what to do next. When dawn breaks on Friday, Caiaphas engineers another meeting of the Jewish leadership called the Sanhedrin.
The Sanhedrin met again early on Friday morning to okay what had been done in the dark, because according to Jewish law, it had to be in the daylight that a capital trial took place. So they all met in the Hall of Hewn Stone, it was called, on the Temple Mount, and they simply rubber stamped the agreement of what had been made the night before.
The sentence was death. Had the Romans not been in power, the Jews would have then stoned Jesus immediately. But the Romans wouldn't allow the Jews to execute anyone. Caiaphas would have to make his case to the Roman governor in charge, Pontius Pilate. Decades before Pilate, the Roman Empire had taken firm control of Judea. But Rome didn't need to install regional governors back then because they had Herod the Great, a Jewish client king who knew how to serve his friends in Rome, including Caesar Augustus and Mark Antony.
Very often the Romans did this to save them the expense of setting up a whole governor's apparatus. So Herod then ruled with the permission of Rome and in behalf of Rome.
When Herod the Great died shortly after Jesus' birth, Rome parceled out the kingdom to be run by Herod's 3 sons, Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, and Herod Archelaus. Almost immediately, Archelaus proved incompetent and was removed. In his place, Rome installed a series of governors, including one named Pontius Pilate. Early Friday morning, Jewish leaders bring Jesus to Pilate, asking for an execution. Pilate isn't interested, saying, "Take him and judge him by your own law." But the Jewish leaders insist. And here, in his palace, Pilate begins to question Jesus.
And I firmly believe that Pilate realized this was a kind of a rigged case, that Jesus was doing something against Jewish law about which he could care less. But he hadn't broken any Roman laws, and for that reason he thought the man should be defended.
Pilate sees the Jesus problem as a no-win situation. If he allows the execution of Jesus, he'll be sending an innocent man to his death. But if he sets Jesus free, the political fallout from Herod Antipas will be disastrous for Pilate.
And really, to understand the politics at the time, you've got to remember that Herod Antipas is lusting after Pilate's position. Look, every time Pilate has an innocent misstep in regard to Jewish law, Herod Antipas is writing Tiberius in Rome about how his governor here has two left feet, and kind of exaggerates the problems that Pilate really kind of innocently stumbled into.
Tiberius doesn't want any unrest from the Jews, and so he chastises Pilate.
Tiberius, he sends Pilate a letter in nasty Latin, warning him not to antagonize his Jewish subjects anymore, because if he does, he will have outlived his usefulness in Judea. Now, Pilate got this letter about 5 or 6 months before Good Friday. Now do you understand why Pilate is under pressure?
Pilate knows that one more letter from Antipas to Tiberius could mean the end of his governorship. So on the fly, he comes up with a counter move, a strategy that would placate Antipas and unload the Jesus problem.
But when he suddenly remembers that Jesus is from Galilee, aha, a light goes in Pilate's head.
Because Jesus is a resident of Galilee, Pilate has the legal option to turn the case over to the ruler of that region, Herod Antipas.
And Pilate beautifully now kills about 5 birds with one stone. Doesn't have to knowingly condemn an innocent man. That's clear. Secondly, if it comes to shedding a prophet's blood, they got a specialist in town. Herod Antipas had already done the job on Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist. So if it came to prophet killing, they have this prophet executioner in town. Let's have him do the job. He'll get blamed, not me.
Herod Antipas was eager to take Jesus, but not because he was in a hurry to kill him. Rather, he'd heard of Jesus' miracles and hoped he might perform some entertaining wonder.
Now here's the deal. When Jesus gets there, Herod only begins the interview with this profound theological challenge. "Hello, Jesus, do a miracle." Well, Jesus wasn't performing that day. And so Herod waves him off, gives him back to Pilate.
Pilate's gesture, allowing Antipas to question Jesus, ended the animosity between the two rivals.
But that's where Luke inserts that passage. But Herod and Pilate were made friends that same day, because before that they'd been hostile with one another.
Stuck with the Jesus problem again, Pilate tries a new strategy. Each year at the Passover celebration, one prisoner is released. This year, Pilate offers a choice: the notorious Barabbas or Jesus. One will be released, the other put to death, crucified. The crowd chooses to release Barabbas, a decision that seems inexplicable.
That on Palm Sunday, Jesus is super popular, and yet on Friday, they're yelling, "Crucify." How can the same people do that? That is the way we were all taught, namely, oh, these are fickle people, they change their minds quickly. Doesn't work against the historical evidence. Who says it's the same crowd? The Bible simply says, in the most overlooked passage, I think, in Scripture, Luke 23:27, Luke carefully tells us a great multitude of Jewish men and women were weeping at that time. There's your Palm Sunday people. They've never lost their appreciation for Jesus. When does he lose popularity? He doesn't. Well then, am I contradicting Scripture? What about the people yelling crucify on Good Friday? Oh, they're Jews too. They're Judean Jews under Sadducean control.
Caiaphas and the Sadducees have a massive payroll with thousands of workers. Coordinating their people to show up at Pilate's residence at the right time would not have been difficult.
This is the only solution to that problem of how a super popular prophet from Galilee could suddenly have people yelling, crucify. Different crowd.
By now, Pilate is out of options and gives Jesus over to be killed. Symbolically washing his hands of the problem will cement Pilate's place in history.
We have Pontius Pilate showing up, the Roman governor, in all four Gospels. We have him showing up in Flavius Josephus, the first century Jewish historian. In fact, Josephus gives us 3 or 4 major additional episodes in Pontius Pilate's governorship, which help explain what's going on Good Friday. Again, we have him historically proven, even by hard evidence. It was in 1962 that an Italian archaeological expedition was digging at Caesarea, which was the Roman capital of Judea, not Jerusalem. And they came across a 2 by 3 foot stone in a stair landing, and they saw it had been chipped and reused, and they wondered if there might be an inscription on the other side, which sometimes happened. They lucked out. They turned it over, and they found on the inscription, to translate it, to the people of Caesarea, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, that is governor, has presented the Tiberium to the people of Caesarea. Tiberium, a building in honor of the Emperor Tiberius, 2-inch Latin lettering.
When Pilate exits the story on Friday morning, Jesus begins the torturous trek through Jerusalem to the place where he will be put to death. Around 9 a.m. on Friday, the crucifixion began. Roman crucifixion was designed to maximize pain, suffering, and humiliation. Many biblical details of Jesus' crucifixion have been supported by archaeological finds, including the Roman practice of nailing victims to the cross, validated by a find in 1968.
A spectacular archaeological discovery was being made, a place called Givat HaMivtar. And there they found tangible evidence, a smoking gun proof, that they nailed victims to the cross. And then they found a 7-inch spike still lodged. The spike had punctured his heel bones, but we also know how they did it now. Because, yes, even a 50-penny nail going into a palm or so would have a hard time holding human flesh over, or even wrist maybe. But the ancients were not foolish. They knew you could increase the head holding capacity of that spike by having the spike first go through a wooden plaque or shim. It was to enable that spike to hold both heels on the cross. So that's the way they crucified Jesus. And we didn't know that until late in the 20th century. Gospel of John has been right the whole time.
At about 3 p.m. on Friday, Jesus dies on the cross. The Roman soldiers, wanting to be sure he was dead, stabbed Jesus with a lance.
The Romans were grimly efficient in this business called crucifixion. The Romans knew how criminals loved to feign death, and so even in these human demolition derbies in Rome, the gladiatorial combat, after each round of deaths, they would have a guy with a red-hot wand, and he would dance among the recumbent bodies in the arena floor and touch each one. And if they flinched in any way, pike went right through the heart. So the Roman batting average for death after crucifixion is about 1,000. I mean, they didn't let people escape. The centurion there pierced Jesus' rib cage and went to the pericardial sac around the heart. And that, you have to be very dead for that to happen when blood and water come out.
Before sundown on Friday, Jesus' dead body is taken down off the cross and placed in a tomb. On Friday night and Saturday, Jesus' followers hide behind closed doors, dejected and afraid. Their leader is dead. They fear they might be next, and their hope for the future seems dashed. Then on Sunday morning, the unexpected. The women visit the tomb and are shocked to find it empty. Even the sources most hostile to Christianity admit the tomb was empty.
There's no question about the fact that even on a historical basis, we can prove the empty tomb, that on Sunday morning, the tomb in which Jesus was buried was in fact empty. Now, of course, we've got to be very fair and say an empty tomb alone does not prove a resurrection. But put it this way, reverse it. You can't have a resurrection without the tomb being empty as its first symptom.
While all the gospel accounts agree the tomb was empty, the details of those first moments on Sunday vary in the biblical accounts.
What's interesting about the resurrection accounts is that we get 4 slightly different accounts. There's no question about it. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics have 2, 3, or 4 women, whereas the Gospel of John has only 1 woman. But what does that prove? We know that people seeing the same event will report it differently. They simply do that. It shows the honesty of the early church editors. They didn't try to coalesce their story into one agreed upon, laundered, edited account. If that happened today, that's what would happen. They try to get it only in one agreed upon, universally agreed upon account. No, the early church was honest and simply reported those differences included, which now in the long run add credibility to the account rather than in any way demeaning it.
Also adding credibility to the gospel accounts is the depiction of Peter. He's described as confused, disloyal, and fearful, not the characteristics one would invent for a church leader. The biblical accounts are packed with this kind of embarrassing material. The only reason to preserve it is if it's true.
Now, that's very important because that brings in what historians call the criterion of embarrassment. It's one of the strongest proofs.
Early Sunday morning, Jesus rises from the dead, appearing first to the women, then to Peter, and then to disciples walking along the road. Later that day, Jesus visits his followers together, and he makes efforts to explain he's not a spirit or a vision. He is a person with a physical body.
When the disciples in the upper room on the evening of Easter were gathered together, and Jesus suddenly appeared among them, having somehow come through the walls or whatever, okay, that looks like a spirit. But Jesus anticipates that objection when he says, "Do you have anything to eat?" Or a week later, "Thomas, touch me, see my wounds." A spirit doesn't have flesh and bones and consumes food, does it?
Sunday morning marked the beginning of a 40-day period during which Jesus visits his followers on multiple occasions, culminating in his ascension into heaven. A few days later, at Pentecost, the number of followers begins to grow exponentially. Thousands upon thousands, believing that a man who said he was also God died and came back to life. As the movement grew, opponents of Christianity quickly took notice.
Surely, if these spectacular events really happened, then we ought to be able to find some fallout in the context of the ancient world, which would reflect that original explosion of Christianity. There's got to be some fallout out there. First of all, I would call to witness Cornelius Tacitus. He's a great Roman historian of the first century. Tacitus is not a Christian author. He kind of hates the Christians. He thinks there's so much sewage. Nevertheless, he concedes that there was a Jesus who was crucified by Pontius Pilate, who the Christians claim rose from the dead. That's exactly what the Bible says. I've found that again and again and again. There are so many points of tangency between the secular and the sacred evidence.
The most detailed accounts are in the Gospels themselves. Luke, for example, offers remarkable detail.
He's very careful, writing for a Gentile, Greco-Roman audience, to make sure this stuff is always aligned with what's happening in the politics of the ancient Mediterranean world at that time. This is why Luke is constantly throwing an anchor out into the mainstream of Greco-Roman history. He also is interested in showing Theophilus and other Christians that these things were not done in a corner. There's not some special mythology going on here. This is nuts and bolts stuff involving real people acting in a real corner of the Mediterranean at a real time in history.
Real events that changed human history. The most important week ever. The week that changed the world.
He was one of them. He was with Jesus.